Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me, especially this day, Thanksgiving Day of 2025. I hope that you're enjoying your day with family and friends and football, of course, because you can always watch these devotionals later at gvbcaz.com, the website for Green Valley Baptist Church. Well, tonight our devotional, I call it Returning to the Upper Room for Thanksgiving. From the standpoint of a Christian, we have to accept the fact that for many, Thanksgiving's no longer considered a religious holiday. Tradition holds that the first Thanksgiving was celebrated as a religious holiday. It was celebrated by the Pilgrims and has its historical roots in a religious observance as they set aside a day to give thanks to God for their blessings in the new world. But the holiday has evolved into a time for family gatherings and for gratitude for things that go far beyond the original religious celebration. On October the 3rd of 1863, during the midst of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln proclaimed this date as a day of Thanksgiving to be celebrated every year. Of course, it was partly to soften the effects of the Civil War. Now, we Christians still celebrate the last Thursday in November as a day to give thanks to God for his many blessings, not only for the past year, but for every year. This year, my family has gathered together, wherever they might be, to celebrate as so many others across the United States and far beyond. I'm fortunate that I have family here because I'm not a good traveler anymore. I know that we hold the date with great reverence and profound significance because we are all blessed in so many ways, even though each year our families may grow smaller in numbers. But our blessings always outweigh the hard times as we have endured throughout the many years. When I think about Thanksgiving, I also think about one of the most important elements of our gratitude, and that is that Jesus Christ gave us a pathway to salvation under the new covenant that he announced to his disciples at the time of their last meal together. A meal where they celebrated Passover in remembrance of the liberation of the Israelites from their bondage in Egypt. But that evening in the upper room held a profound significance for Jesus' followers that would be a revelation of his introduction of the new covenant of grace. A new covenant which would be brought about through his suffering and his death on the cross as the perfect substitutionary sacrifice for forgiveness of sins, past, present, and for future. All of this by virtue of his triumph over death and Satan. In other words, he would fulfill the Old Testament prophecy of the coming of the Messiah, a promise that manifests itself in our eternal thankfulness, a promise that makes all of our blessings profound and meaningful. A promise that once fulfilled made us a new creation. What brought us to the upper room in the first place? Well, we're told in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that Jesus revealed to his disciples that he would be betrayed by one of the 12. So let's look a little bit closer to what happened according to these Gospels. As we relate our thanksgiving to the events of the Last Supper, let's look at the deep meaning of each of the foods that were on the table. Now, it wasn't just bread and wine. There were several very meaningful foods that were there also. In addition, the meal took place between two important ritual holy days. One, the festival of the unleavened bread, and the other, the Passover. One of the foods was hyssop, which represented the branch used to apply the lamb's blood on the doorpost and lintel so that the angel of death would pass over the houses of God's people in Egypt. It also represents the moment that forces Pharaoh's hand and allowed the Israelites to leave. There would have also been unleavened bread. In the Israelites' haste to leave Egypt, God commanded that they not take time for the yeast to rise to cause the bread to rise. Yeast came to represent what marked things that go bad, as they thought it was the yeast that caused mold. So yeast represented everything that separated God's children from him. So when Jesus held the bread up, he said that the bread represented his body that was given for them. He was saying that he was sinless, and just as important, that his body was not subject to decay. We can be thankful that he was a perfect sinless offering for us. As for his body not suffering decay, we read Psalm 16:9-10, which says, "Therefore my heart is glad and my body rejoices. Yes, my body will dwell in safety, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol. You will not give your faithful one to see the grave." Just think about it. The unleavened bread represents the promise that we will also be resurrected. The last item on the table is the lamb. It represented the unblemished lamb that was chosen to be sacrificed and whose blood was applied to the doorframes of God's people. Jesus, too, is saying that he is the perfect lamb, the perfect sacrifice to free people from their sins, as the original one freed his people from death. It's interesting to note that it was a tradition during Jesus' time to bring the unblemished lamb into the household prior to its sacrifice. Naturally, the family would become bonded to the animal and consequently suffer the feeling of loss and sadness when it came time to sacrifice it. Everything on the Passover table represented Jesus, how he was perfect and unblemished by sin and incorruptible. He represented the hyssop as a connection to the plant that was used to save God's people from death. He was the unleavened bread, a symbol of his resurrection and consequently ours as well. Just as the foods represented specific things, not only in a ritualistic sense, but also in a prophetic sense. Jesus connected the traditional ritualistic meaning of their hardship and sacrifice to his own. When we pray over our Thanksgiving meal with family and friends, our prayer will recall words from our prayers for Thanksgiving at every meal. So it was with Jesus and his blessing over the bread and the cup of wine. The words that Jesus used is written down by Luke in chapter 22, verse 19, which go like this. He took some bread and he gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it into pieces and gave it to his disciples, saying, "This is my body, which is given to you. Do this in remembrance of me." It was a prayer very similar to this, with the exception of the last part, of course, that any Jew would recite before a meal. It was called the Kiddush, which was a traditional prayer thanking God for their daily bread. Also, Jesus also asked a blessing on the wine, which was a traditional prayer called the Hamutzi, praising God for the fruit of the vine. Although these traditional prayers of thanksgiving are found in the Talmud, at Jesus' time they were passed down by word of mouth from generation to generation. These prayers were recited to thank God for sustenance, and that is the bread, and celebration, which would have been the wine. Jesus also used another phrase, which we also repeat, but very possibly gloss over the profound meaning of the words, remember me. You know, the Jews have always put great emphasis on remembering the significant events in their past. The word remember takes on a different meaning than what we usually associate it with. When we say remember, you know, the meaning expresses the experience of the past in the present time. Like we say they, referring to our forefathers and the things that they accomplished, they would be saying we. In essence, they're placing themselves in the past and recalling the past, but experiencing the same thing in the present. I know it's a little bit hard to understand for us. Unless we had been raised to place extreme importance on tradition, it would be hard to grasp this emotion. As in the past, as in the Passover meal, they would have remembered what God had done for them through the symbolic representation of the foods at the meal, and relive the emotions as they fled Egypt. But when Jesus prays, he says, remember me. Remember me. Yes, he's saying to remember God's blessings in the past, of course. But now he is saying, remember me and what I am about to do for you. He is saying to remember when you take this bread that it is my broken and beaten body that I suffer for you. When you take the wine, yes, praise God for what he's always done for us. But also remember that it represents my blood that will be spilled for you. This is not something that happened in the distant past when celebrating God's forgiveness and watch care. It is something that is renewed each time that we celebrate and remember this meal. You know, the significance of the words Jesus used also apply to the cup of wine. Luke 22:20 reads, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." While you think of Jesus referring to a new covenant, it's something not heard of before. Jesus is really referring to a prophecy from the book of Jeremiah in chapter 31, verses 31 to 33. It says, "Days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand and led them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel. After that time, declares the Lord, I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people." You know, now the revelation really didn't sink in at the moment with the disciples. But for us on this side of the cross, everything comes into focus at this point. Jesus introduces the new covenant, yes, and the new covenant brought about by Jesus' blood sacrifice, his death and resurrection. his triumph over sin, and all of this as a result of God's grace and mercy. The final accumulation of a plan of redemption that was set into motion before the fall of mankind in the garden. It is the same new covenant that Jeremiah spoke of so many years before. Now, through Jesus, all of mankind can approach the very throne of God through him who has been given all authority. And we can experience the new covenant of grace. At this time of year, when we think of Thanksgiving and celebrating the birth of Christ, the Christ child, we can be truly grateful for that last meal shared with his disciples and the events that transpired very soon after that, for they forever changed our lives. So this Thanksgiving, I'm reclaiming this special day as a religious holy day. Not only a day to enjoy family and friends and a wonderful meal together, but a day to remember how it all started and what we should be truly thankful for. You know, once again, I wish everybody a happy, grateful Thanksgiving. A day to remember. Well, thank you for those who will be watching this devotional later. Thank you for taking your time. I just hope that you're able to find something of value from this. So at any rate, I'll let those who are watching get back to the football game, and I will say good night. I am Charles Logan, your host, wishing all of you a good rest of the holiday and a good week to come. Until, Lord willing, we can get together again next Thursday for the Look Into the Holy Book devotional. Until then, I will say good night.